Hello and welcome. My name is Beyonce, and today we will be breaking down and discussing the fourth episode of season 1 of Sex and the City. Valley of the 20-something Guys was written by Michael Patrick King, MPK, and directed by the returning Allison McLean. Sarah Jessica Parker has called this her favorite episode of the series, which we'll talk about more at the end. But I do feel like this episode really shows the confidence that Darren Star and MPK had in their ideas and direction for the show. But I don't want to spoil anything yet, so let's dive in. We opened this episode in almost the exact way we opened the pilot episode, Once Upon a Time. Only this time, we hear the tale of two people we actually care about, Carrie and Big. This also won't be our only pilot episode reference, but via voiceover, Carrie tells us about how she and Big kept running into each other, in some cases literally, like here in what I'm 95% sure is a happy hour inside of Nika's, which used to be inside the Stanhope Hotel, which we'll talk about again later. But Carrie is just very casual here compared to everyone else. It's like, tell me you're a writer without telling me you're a writer. We then see them outside of a cab on Fifth Avenue across from the Met at the fashion show after party from episode 2, Models and Mortals. And then we get to their final chance meeting at a bris. And I have questions. Is Carrie just crashing a bris? Why is either of them here? Who is this wealthy lawyer mutual friend? She is at least dressed appropriately for this in a red wool blend blazer by Alaya, which we will see again in a later season. And that makes this blazer fairly unique because there aren't many items we see Carrie in twice. She either wears them a lot, like her fur coat, or only once. Carrie also carries this vintage alligator clutch throughout the entire episode, which again is not very common for really any of the characters. Also, apparently, no matter where Big goes, he's dressed in a suit, which will become more important as the season and their relationship progress. But I do love the woman's reaction to the right of Carrie. Like, did she not know what was about to happen? They invited her, and she thought to herself, that seems like something I would enjoy. So they decide to finally meet on purpose. And this brings us to Saturday night at 10:30 for the opening of the hottest new restaurant in Manhattan, which apparently has no name. But as we approach, we see the crowd waiting to get in seems a little spread out. But then once we get to Carrie, Miranda, and Charlotte talking, all of a sudden the crowd is pushing in from all sides. But I do love how we see Miranda and Carrie right up front and Charlotte off to the side with her new mans as we approach. Now, this restaurant exterior is at 137 Ludlow Street. This building is actually no longer there, but 139 Ludlow Street is, albeit with a slightly updated exterior. Also, none of the businesses across the street are still there, which is kind of sad, but not totally surprising. But that apartment complex is still there. Now, Carrie is back in her fur coat, and Charlotte's part is back to normal. Unfortunately, once we get inside, we see that Carrie is in another little black dress for the fourth episode in a row. But at least they've all been different. We had a long sleeve in the first episode, we saw a halter top in the second episode, and a traditional scoop neck last episode. Here we have an asymmetric one-shoulder neckline. Now, Charlotte points out her new man, whose name is Brian. Brian only has one line this entire episode, which is insane because he's played by Josh Stamberg, who you've very likely seen at some point. He was Jane's boss, Jay Parker, in the very underrated TV show Drop Dead Diva. He was also Max Cadman in The Affair and Carl Fletcher in Parenthood. And he was recently Director Haywood in the amazing MCU series WandaVision. Now, Brian is described by Carrie as
he had her big three: looks, manners, money.
And whoever said Charlotte is shallow. But of course, the unspoken fourth is that he's white. Like, oops, I said the quiet part out loud. Now, we don't actually find out that much about Brian, only that he wants to buy a painting from Charlotte's gallery. And if you're wondering why they're all just standing outside in line, despite obviously being on the list, Carrie is still outside because she's waiting for Mr. Big, which Miranda says as much with an air of hope, which will also be important as the series progresses, especially since she hasn't met him yet. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure she won't meet him until the final episode of the season. And Charlotte won't meet him at all until next season. Miranda waves to apparently no one, as Carrie tells Charlotte it's not a date. He said, "Meet me for a drink thing." And Miranda continues to smile as Charlotte tries to convince Carrie, us, but probably mostly herself, that a drink thing is good, even if it's not a date. Charlotte is such an optimist. And Miranda's looking for Skipper when Charlotte says, "I don't know how you can date that younger guy. I mean, they're so scattered and unfocused." This gives us a nice bit of foreshadowing for a season 2 episode, but Miranda shuts that shit down real quick, saying she's not dating him. And I feel like we're on this emotional roller coaster with poor Skippy. On the one hand, he's in as many episodes as Mr. Big so far, but I don't know if we're supposed to have any sympathy for him at all. But I'll save this for the next episode. We finally go inside, and Carrie's checking her messages and playing it over for Miranda to decipher, which just goes to show that we will always be looking for the subtext of the text we get from men, whether that's via voicemail, conversation, text message, email. It doesn't matter what it is. Poor communication leads us to going fucking crazy.
How pathetic do I feel asking you if a guy kinda likes me?
But I do appreciate this unexpected reminder that not everyone owned a cell phone in 1998. We really haven't seen one since Skipper's in episode 2. Also, before we leave, is that Pamela Anderson behind them? If it is, why is she here? Pamela Anderson was likely living in California, filming her TV show VIP, which is one show that contributed greatly to this. Maybe she was in New York avoiding Tommy Lee, but the question remains, why is she there? As far as I can tell, she had no real connection to anyone associated with the show, and she was already so well known in 1998 that she wouldn't really be flying under the radar in order to do these kind of background cameos. The only connection I can think of would be Pat Field and Pamela Anderson's connection to other New York designers like former club kid Richie Rich, who started Heatherette in 1999. If that's the case, Anderson won't be the last person Pat Fields gets on the show. But moving on, we walk up to the table with Carrie and Miranda, where Samantha is sitting with two little youngins. First, we meet John. Jon, no H, no last name, which is fitting since we don't actually know what the restaurant is or is supposed to be, which is fine since it's not even there anymore. But I do wonder if it was an active restaurant or if they dressed up one that's about to open or has recently closed, and that's why we don't get the name of it. Anyway, John is played by Cole Seduth, who wasn't in a lot after this, but he did portray Rhett in 54 and Mark in Road Trip. We then meet Sam, who completely missed the opportunity to say Sam I Am. Sam is played by a very obscure actor that we've never talked about before, Timothy Olyphant. Now, before this role, he was Brett Artunian in The First Wives Club, which also starred Sarah Jessica Parker, although they never actually shared the screen. He was also Mickey in Scream 2. And then following this role, he was Raylan Givens in Justified, Dennis in The Broken Hearts Club, and recently Cobb Vanth in The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett. So Carrie tells us 20-something guys always know the really important beat people. Busboys, bouncers, plus they have cute butts. And I love how this is still such an incredibly accurate statement, at least for cool guys like Sam. And this is probably just me being nitpicky, but how does he know Miranda's name? Did Samantha tell him that the other blonde walking up would be Carrie and the redhead is Miranda? He also didn't actually ask Carrie what her drink should be. Anyway, I love how these are two very genuine reactions to kind of accidentally watching your friend make out with someone you don't know. We watch poor Skipper make his way to the table, and I love this detail of him passing Sam at the bar with the drinks already on the tray. We do also see Timothy Oliphant waiting for his cue to enter, which makes sense because the original aspect ratio of the series was the standard 4:3 before widescreen displays became commonplace. If you didn't know this though, this looks really creepy. Honestly, I love this slight glimpse into the awkwardness that comes with making television. Skipper gets Miranda a rum and coke, and she should have just dumped him right on the spot. It's never okay to order a rum and coke past the age of 21. Sam shows Carrie his tongue piercing, which is not as risque to us now, but this totally contributes to Sam's cool 20-something guy persona because piercings were very popular amongst alt-fashion crowds in the late 90s and early 2000s. So the leather jacket, t-shirt, jeans, piercing, and spiky hair all let us know he's very cool. Of course, this entire look would become a cliche thanks to boy bands and the cool guy in each. Think AJ McLean of the Backstreet Boys, or Jacob Underwood of O-Town, or Michael Johnson of Natural. Big comes up explaining that he was able to make it for an hour, but is actually out of time. But he says he was looking for her for 20 minutes. And all I'm going to say about this is we can see the back wall of the main dining area behind Carrie and the front door behind Big. So how hard was he actually looking? Granted, I'm sure Carrie and Miranda went to the restroom before checking Carrie's messages, so that would have made her harder to find, but I'm just being hard on him. I will give him points, finally, for waiting to get in for 30 minutes. Like, at my age, I don't even wait 30 seconds. Carrie says, men in their 40s are like the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle. Tricky, complicated, and you're never really sure you got the right answer. Now, if you are a superfan like me, you know that Carrie doesn't technically find out Big's age until season 4, and even then, we just get a range. That means that Carrie either assumes Big is in his 40s or they forgot about this line and we should just pay attention to the context and pretend she didn't just decisively tell us that he's in his 40s. And I'm obviously leaning toward the latter here. Now, the New York Times Sunday crossword puzzle is notoriously the largest and most difficult of the week. But Sam declares the place tired, so they decide to leave, and they leave full drinks on the bar, which is offensive. They go to the nearby 20-something club, which I'm 97% sure is Madam X in Greenwich Village, which is located at 94 West Houston Street. So it's nearby for a New Yorker, but it's probably not walking distance for these four. Madam X is a woman-owned lounge that opened in 1997. As we can see, it's known for its red lighting, seductive atmosphere, and vintage couches. Hilariously, its Google description says a 20-something crowd frequents this dimly lit lounge with crimson bordello decor. We can see the red light hanging in the entryway, as well as the address number that matches this exterior photo. Before we even continue, though, where did Charlotte and Miranda go? Like, Charlotte didn't even make it into the restaurant with Brian, and Miranda and Skipper just vanished after Sam brought the drinks. Carrie, Sam, Samantha, and John are at the club, and Samantha tells us John is too hot to be seen, somewhere borderline tired. Carrie tells us it was a tough town. Hot places had the lifespan of a medfly, which is apparently only up to 2 months. This might be why we don't get any names of any of the locations during this episode. Like I said, I'm pretty sure the restaurant was probably closed or about to open. Madam X was only open for a year during filming in 1998, and we'll talk about Nika's and the Stanhope later. Once inside, we go through a series of great 20-something guys. The groovy guy wearing a goddamn backward Kangol flat cap and drinking a Rolling Rock. I don't know whether I pity him or hate him, but that's a fine line. We have the corporate guy, who I'm pretty sure is drinking an Amstel Light. The jock guy, who is also likely wearing a backward Kangol hat, but looks so much better in it. And finally, the underage guy, who looks like he's also carrying an Amstel Light, but who let this kid in? Like, is it true what Gossip Girl says? Underage kids are just running around bars? Anyway, we're going to come back to these great 20-something guys shortly. Sam and John walk up, and we see that John is drinking a Budweiser. Samantha and Carrie are both drinking Corona, just like Sam was at the restaurant, and it looks like Sam is now drinking a Rolling Rock. For some reason, Carrie says they're drinking from pony-necked beers, but those aren't pony-necked beers. They're definitely regular-ass bottles. We come to the next morning when Carrie is woken up by her phone, and we see that we've traveled back in time to the season 2 bedroom. The only major differences this time are the missing rotary phone on the chair and the leaning frame moving slightly to the left. I have a feeling they actually shot this episode right after Models and Mortals, but we don't actually need to discuss this. When Carrie reaches for the phone, we do see Gail Godwin's, a mother and 2 daughters, on the table behind the bed. I think I'll be able to identify more of the books later, but the pleated black sleep mask Carrie wears is by Mimi a la Mode, which is actually in LA, not New York, but it's still open. So if you're in LA, go support her. We finally get to see Samantha's bedroom, which is exactly what we would expect from her. I do have to admit that I kind of hate these pillow shams. They remind me of the parents' bed in Home Alone, but it's fine. I do love this massive bed frame she has, and really all of the red just makes her bedroom look so luxurious. I'm also obsessed with her phone. It gives her that touch of old Hollywood that I very much associate with Samantha. If she smoked, you know she'd have one of those long cigarette holders like Breakfast at Tiffany's or Cruella de Vil. Really, between the coach scene with Tommy last episode and her performance here, I could totally see Kim Cattrall getting a ton of inspiration from Mae West as she was developing Samantha. And much like Charlotte's bedroom, Samantha's bedroom will stay almost exactly the same until season 3. Carrie searches for her morning Marlboro Light as Samantha tells her about last night. But 2 things. First, oh God, smoking as soon as you wake up, Carrie? She is definitely a smoker. Like, that's commitment. 2, she actually picks up a pack of Merit Ultralights, which is made by the same company as Marlboro, but I guess it's good she's smoking ultralights as soon as she wakes up. Now, this is the first montage of sexual positions for Samantha, and I love that she did something to him here. We don't know for sure what exactly it is, but these facial expressions are unhinged, and I love it. Samantha tells Carrie, these guys in their 20s, they are up for anything. And we'll put a pin in this statement until a certain season 3 episode. But real quick before we move on, I have a theory developing as to why this montage looks and feels the way it does, and why, in the pilot episode and the opening credits of the first movie, we see literal quotes from each of the characters. In a nutshell, in a show with an ensemble cast, we would get each character's point of view as they experience things. But here, I think we're actually getting Carrie's point of view as she imagines what Sam is telling her. Does that mean Samantha didn't peg John? I think a certain episode backsprain might have the answer. But again, I'm just developing this theory as season 1 progresses. Speaking of Carrie's point of view, we come to the quandary of the episode. Are men in their 20s the new designer drug? This quandary, combined with the title of the episode, is one of, if not the cleverest of the season and the whole series. Sure, each of the quandaries moving forward will tie into the title and subsequent theme of the episode, but this one stands out because the title is a direct reference to an iconic piece of pop culture. The title, Valley of 20-something Men, is a riff of the novel and movie Valley of the Dolls. The novel by Jacqueline Suzanne is one of the best-selling fiction books in publishing history. It was published in 1966, and its film adaptation came out a year later. Personally, I love this movie, but mostly because it's easily one of the most accidentally campy movies ever made. But for a full breakdown of the history of the film, I suggest Be Kind Rewind's 2-part series. But the story revolves around 3 women chasing success in show business while fighting inner demons and addiction. In the novel, the dolls of the title are amphetamines and barbiturates that each character abuses in some form, hence 20-something guys being the new designer drug. I'll talk about this more toward the end of the episode, But this is why we get 3 of the characters involved in this particular storyline, with Charlotte kind of doing her own thing, but I am glad that she's still so involved in the episode and we're not just ignoring her like we did in the second episode. Before we leave Carrie's apartment, I just have to ask, what's going on outside of Carrie's window? This is the first time we can definitively tell that they're using a set in the show. I do have to say, though, in its original non-HD 4K airing, this wouldn't have looked so bad. So to transition to what happens to us next, Carrie says, "But I couldn't help but wonder, what do they see in us?" And this is the first time that we get this kind of setup, which becomes a key narrative element throughout the series and which has inspired countless memes. This transition brings us to interviews with the group of 20-something guys playing sports ball and saying the most expected things possible about why they're into older women, despite it only making sense really for 2 of them. So hopefully these guys all look familiar since we were introduced to them in almost this exact order earlier. Here's our groovy guy, now identified as Jake Lewis, a bass player and dog walker who's 25. Jake is still wearing a backward Kangol hat, but he's added these dice sport goggles around his neck. If this feels familiar, it's because we see a very similar goggle style in Can't Hardly Wait by another character who has no reason to be wearing them. Luckily, this is one late 90s accessory that has not come back. Our corporate guy is 27-year-old Rich Stein, a stock analyst. Rich looks like he's wearing a Ralph Lauren crew neck sweatshirt. The jock guy is Tim Walker, a 24-year-old med student. Tim is once again better than Jake because he's not wearing his damn Kangol hat to play sports ball. We get Skipper's H here, which is 27, which I can't help but wonder, why are he and Carrie friends? Like, how do they know each other? And then underage guy is 17-year-old high school senior Fred King. Literally could have been 1 to 3 years older because I seriously hope he's not sleeping with any 30-year-olds. Fred wears a North Face puffer vest, which they still sell in some form, and this might actually be the Noopst vest. But like I said, only one of these 20-somethings is dating one of our 3 main characters, and we don't know if any of them is even attracted to women in their 30s. Again, all from Carrie's point of view. Like, did she actually interview these 4 guys, or are they the ones she remembers singling out in the club? But I'll be the one who overthinks it for us. So much like the Stanford scene in the previous episode, these interviews do nothing to advance the plot. We don't learn anything particularly new other than maybe that men are horrible at every age. But one thing I do want to point out is where they're playing the sports ball. They're playing at the West 4th Street Courts, famously known as The Cage. We can see the Waverly Theater behind Skipper, which is now the IFC Center. You can also see the West 4th Street Washington Square Station as Jake spews disgusting things about women. This court has shown up in various commercials and on ESPN and stuff, but I actually remember it from the 1996 movie Eddie, starring one of my favorites, Whoopi Goldberg. You can even see the McDonald's that I think used to be on 3rd Street and the Taco Bell that used to be across the street but is now in urgent care. We then cut to Miranda and Carrie walking along Madison Avenue between 71st and 72nd Streets, so really right down the street from Carrie's apartment. This is our first time seeing Carrie walking and talking with one of the other main characters. As they're walking, we see the Madison Avenue Presbyterian Church in the background, as well as the residential co-op building at 31 East 72nd Street and its ground level businesses. They walk by the residences at 872 Madison Avenue, and then we see the Gertrude Rhinelander Waldo House across the street. It is a 19th century French Renaissance Revival mansion that became the Ralph Lauren flagship store in 1986. The stores that Miranda and Carrie pass are now additional Ralph Lauren stores, including the men's flagship store that replaced whatever was below those black awnings, and the Ralph Lauren baby store that took over this store that Carrie looks into. Carrie is wondering why it is that she, Samantha, and Miranda are trying out this new designer drug. Miranda justifies it with a line that is at once biting commentary while being an astute observation that will come up multiple times. She says there are no available men in their 30s in New York. Giuliani had them removed along with the homeless. Now, for some context on this commentary, in 1998, Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York, and his tenure was polarizing up until 9/11. When it comes to handling the homeless in particular, his policies were still polarizing, and some of his tactics are actually still popular among mayors today, unfortunately. But he had no problem conducting sweeps of parks and other public places to arrest homeless people and move them to shelters, which is what I think Miranda is referencing here. As The Nation put it in 2002, by 1995, he became punitive toward the homeless. Homeless advocates had to sue him over the city's failure to provide adequate medical care to homeless children. His administration denied food stamps to more than 100,000 people, many of them children for whom the stamps were the only protection against the pangs of hunger. A class action lawsuit was recently filed by lawyers for the homeless who had been improperly denied their benefits. He would also use the opening of homeless shelters in certain districts to punish political enemies. But I do find this line incredibly fascinating because, with the exception of another Giuliani reference in season 2 and a particularly fun relationship in season 3, the show remains fairly apolitical despite its subject matter, and I'll discuss why that is eventually, but let's move along. Miranda reminds us again that she's just sleeping with Skipper by saying, "What's really going on here is sex. Good old-fashioned, eager to please, do what I tell you to, Eagle Scout sex." Miranda says this, I think, to justify her continuing to see and sleep with Skipper. It's also a totally fair assessment of hers since she's already been on dates with 2 other people at this point, and she's definitely abusing this designer drug, but in a totally different way than Carrie and Samantha. Like, let's face it, Miranda is just abusive toward poor Skippy. But then Carrie lies to her, like she always does, and ditches her for a meeting with her editor. Carrie goes to meet Sam to shop at Banana Republic. Now, they're definitely in a Banana Republic, but I can't tell if this location is closed or if it was just remodeled. I can't find a store that has this exposed brick. Also, why is cool guy Sam shopping at Banana Republic? It's not really his style. He probably should be at the Gap instead. Also, what does he do for a living that he needs a shirt from Banana Republic? Anyway, we need to stop here so that we can prepare ourselves for a moment that is going to change our lives forever. We are about to get our first view of Carrie Bradshaw's closet. Now, our first look has some odd pieces of furniture that I would definitely trip over at least once a week, and it's not as full as it will be later on in the show, but this is truly a historic moment. One small closet for Carrie, one giant leap for the Sex and the City fandom. And one thing I especially appreciate is that this little desk setup will remain the same throughout the series. We also see the armoire that she gets a blanket out of in a late season 4 episode. Now, Charlotte calls in a panic, saying, "I just need 5 minutes," but no. You need more than 5 minutes for this conversation, Charlotte. By the way, spoiler alert, we can see a stuffed rabbit on Charlotte's bed behind her. So since Charlotte needs some time, Carrie picks her up on her way to the drink thing with Big. Visually, we're already clued into Charlotte's discomfort with not just this conversation, but the situation as a whole. Her coat is buttoned all the way up to the top, and she is clutching that bag like she's walking through a bad neighborhood. Also, I like to think the cab driver's response to this was inspired by the HBO show Taxicab Confessions, which aired from 1995 to 2006. It was a show that used candid cameras to capture frequent, explicit sex talks or even sex acts from passengers. It was definitely a product of 90s HBO. But I think this scene, more than any other that came before it, really gave us the real trajectory of the show. Darren Star said, "I knew HBO would be great when I went in there and pitched them our first season. I said, Charlotte's dating a guy who wants to have anal sex, and she doesn't want to become Mrs. Up the Butt. I thought, HBO original programming president Chris Albrecht is either going to laugh or throw me out of the office. And he laughed. Carrie tells Charlotte they're picking up Miranda and Samantha to help out since it warrants multiple perspectives and so that Carrie can get to the drink thing, which Charlotte once again responds to with such excitement. Even in her state of abject blackness, Charlotte was a dating optimist. Carrie hugs Charlotte and then they just sit in silence during the time it takes to pick up Miranda. They pick up Miranda at 62nd and Madison, which likely means we're just circling Central Park a few times to get all four women into the cab. To be fair, up until now, we've only heard Carrie's official cross streets, East 72nd Street and 3rd Avenue. But if Charlotte does live on the other side of Central Park, we could have picked up Miranda first and saved some money. Anyway, Charlotte got to be very Charlotte-y at the end of the previous episode, and Miranda gets to be very Miranda-y here. Just cut through the bullshit and figure out what you want. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about the dialogue here because it's one of my favorite scenes of all time in terms of the dialogue, but I will say a few things about this scene in general. First, throughout the series, we're going to get more problematic friendship moments from Carrie than good ones, but this is one of our first examples of her being a really good friend, specifically to Charlotte. She made herself even more late for drinks with Big to pick everyone up to talk through this. Second, why did Carrie need to pick everyone up? This is where we can break things down visually once again. So to me, Carrie looks almost as uncomfortable as Charlotte about this topic. Like, I don't think Carrie would ever do this, but that's based on more than just this scene. Meanwhile, Miranda and Samantha are much more comfortable with the idea. We see slightly more skin showing, telling us that they're a bit more open to it, and their hands aren't clutched around anything. Also, our devil's advocate Samantha is dressed in red and practically sitting on Charlotte's shoulder. I think this is also why we picked up Miranda before Samantha. Miranda is open to it, but has reservations because of the power dynamics associated with it, which I'll get to in a second. Samantha is kind of on the other side. Try it before you reject it outright. Now, moving forward, I'm going to try to keep my opinions to myself about these types of things so I can talk about them in the podcast I'm starting with my best friend to just discuss each episode. But in my opinion, I want us to have is a red flag, meaning this isn't about Charlotte's pleasure at all. It's about Brian's. So I would probably agree with Miranda and say to her, don't do it. But I do love Charlotte's face after
a preview.
One thing before we go, the cab driver has no name, but he's played by Panikkar Apundran. He will actually show up uncredited throughout the series. Unfortunately, he passed away in March of this year. So Carrie makes it to drinks with Big, and we're back in Nika's inside the Stanhope, just in what is probably the dining room, whereas we were in the bar before. Since I love efficiency, kudos to the production team for hitting 3 birds with 1 stone, and we're not done with Stanhope just yet. I also tried to hunt down this dress, but I can't find this rhinestone neckline and material combination anywhere. If this dress is designer, I feel like it could be one of 4. Calvin Klein, Donna Karan, Diane von Furstenberg, or Michael Kors. Each had a cerulean dress with a similar v-neck and hem length, and I'm actually leaning toward it not being designer or being at the very least vintage because I couldn't find many designers who were making dresses in what looks like mohair. At first I thought it was jersey, but when we look at it closer, we see that it has slight fuzziness that older mohair items kind of get. Anyway, drinks are interrupted by Big's friend Jack, who's kind of a dick. As Carrie says, there he was, right in the middle of my drink thing, Mr. Marvelous. Now, Mr. Marvelous does show up in the book, and much like Mr. Big in the book, Mr. Marvelous doesn't actually have a name. Instead, we meet him in Chapter 12, Skipper and Mr. Marvelous Seek Hot Sex in Southampton Hedges. In the chapter, Bushnell talks about the adventures of 3 bachelors, 2 of whom we've already met, Skipper Johnson and Stanford Blatch. The third is Mr. Marvelous, 65, says he's 60. Square jaw, silver hair, bright blue eyes, athletic, all parts work on demand. Married and divorced 5 times, 12 kids, wives number 2, 3, and 4, all good friends. Buddies wonder what his secret is. Beach toys, none. But can talk about penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, house in Bedford, apartment in Palm Beach. staying with friends for the weekend on Further Lane in East Hampton, considering buying a place. Much like our book, Mr. Marvelous, this one seems to always be on the prowl. Now, do we think Mr. Big is lying about Jack calling him crying? Let me know your feelings in the comments. But also, what does shoot bear mean? There could have been a million better ways to say just do guy things. Anyway, Carrie decides to leave Big and Mr. Marvelous, leaves, and walks right past the 20-something club, saying, I walked 48 blocks in $400 shoes. Now, I can't find these specific shoes either, but based on the heel and the placement of the strap, I feel like these might be Gucci slides. Unfortunately, every shoe designer has a slide, so I can't be sure, but I feel comfortable saying Gucci over like Manolo Blahniks or Jimmy Choo's. Also, this would not have just been 40 blocks. She would have walked right past her apartment before she got to the club. But Carrie walks past the former locations of Zinc Bar and Yama. Zinc Bar is now at 82 West 3rd Street, and Yama is now at 122 East 17th Street. Carrie goes inside for a fix and decides that she's not getting a good enough high from the kissing. Meanwhile, Samantha realized as long as she dated someone younger, she would always be older. She gave up 20-somethings right then and there. And we know this isn't true, but for this story's sake, let's just go with it. We also cut to Charlotte, who continues her breakdown.
I don't know what I want, but I'm afraid if I don't, then you'll dump me. And if I do, then I'll be the up the butt girl. And I don't want to be the up the butt girl because, men don't marry the up the butt girl. Who ever heard of Mrs. Up the Butt?
Again, I'm going to try to keep my opinions to myself, but I'm pretty sure I know more Mrs. Up the Butts than not. Also, again, this is Brian's only line in the entire episode. Carrie goes home with Sam saying, who cares about age, crossword puzzles, the cab money I'd left on the table? This felt so good. I'd do anything to keep this high. And just when I thought I couldn't get any higher, he spooned me. This brings us to the harsh light of the next morning. And let's face it, we've all seen this apartment, or at least this bedroom. I do have to say, this is one of the least offensive ones I've ever seen, but I usually react this exact same way to straight boy decor. So let's explore. We have some kind of hot sauce behind what is definitely an Urban Outfitters rainbow candle. The sheets he owns have a pattern that looks very Indian. So they're probably also Urban Outfitters since they have a history of cultural appropriation. But I love the detail that the pillows don't match. Also, the fitted sheet could be part of the set, but probably not. We zoom past this mermaid poster that looks like it came from the mall, like one of those stores that sells samurai swords and bamboo and incense and miniature Dungeons and Dragons figures, which I'm not judging, by the way. I still have a little Buddha figure from one of those stores. We also see C-3PO and R2-D2 figures on this metal shelf, which is such a nice detail. Again, we've all seen this shelf in the apartment of a 20-something-year-old, like the cringe. We do at least see some books on the shelf, but what do you want to bet that at least half of those books are college textbooks or were required reading for an English lit class? We also quickly pan past a poster of the April 17th, 1997 Rolling Stone magazine cover with Beck and the brief dedication to Notorious B.I.G., who was murdered on March 9th, 1997. We see the pizza box with one slice of pizza left, and then all of the laundry, a VHS tape outside of its cover, and some dirty magazines. When we pan a second time, we see another Beck poster, this time for what is apparently a poster for the 1997 Odelay tour. Behind the Beck poster is a no spitting allowed bar sign and another poster I can't quite read, but I think it's another show poster, but one for a show before he apparently fell in love with Beck. What does it mean that Sam was really into Beck? I genuinely have no idea. We also see a beer bottle and a bag of Wise potato chips. I've never heard of Wise chips, which makes sense because they're only available in stores in Eastern Seaboard states. And then I don't even want to know what is to the left. It looks like something you'd find on the set of a B horror movie. Also, that damn tapestry tacked up as a window covering. But Sam finally says more than a few words, and we understand why Carrie never really dates anyone younger than her again. Season 3 notwithstanding. Now, Carrie somehow doesn't break her neck walking down the ladder, nor does she freak out at the painted mannequin off to the side, which is another very 90s thing. Like, I'm pretty sure they borrowed this and the outfit from a Pauly Shore movie, or possibly even Empire Records. And speaking of We've All Been There apartments, that damn nasty carpet and that furniture. Like, can we say trigger warning? I will give them some credit for actually having some matching plates and champagne flutes, even if it does look like they don't use any of them, since the dishes in the sink definitely do not match. Also, you can just smell this scene. I do love that they have a bunch of board games all stacked up in their pantry, including multiple editions of Trivial Pursuit, including the 80s extension pack and the Silver Screen edition, along with Scrabble and Boggle. Now, their bathroom looks much more like a bar restroom than an actual apartment bathroom, so there's a lot going on. I'll just point out a few things, though, like this drawing of a pot leaf that looks like it's trying to cover a hole in the wall. Yikes. We also see a sticker for Prong's 1991 album Prove You Wrong. And then next to that, we see what looks like OJ Gives Good Head, which is very dark. And then next to that is So Does Your Mom. We see Olive You and a drawing of an olive with hearts surrounding it.
My name is an anagram for I love.
What's an anagram?
Look it up, big boy.
And then next to that, we see I Have No TP, which tells us Carrie's immediate future. Luckily, Carrie gets the hell out of there and decides to go shopping, which honestly, good for her, turning her walk of shame into a walk of joy. But we look at these Charles Jordan flower print pumps, which are not Carrie's style at all. Hopefully, she saw these in the window and bought something else, because she did buy something at Barty's New York. Although Charles Jordan's shoes did come in a red box, so Carrie may still be drunk from the night before. But if she did buy those flower ones, we never actually see her wear them. Thank goodness. Unfortunately, Barney's is no longer the Barney's we knew and loved in the 90s, but that's a story for another time. Carrie walks along Fifth Avenue before running into Mr. Marvelous and a date, who I assume is the woman from the night before. If this is the same woman from the night before, Mr. Marvelous was right. She's beautiful. Big pops up and asks Carrie to join them. Instead of answering, she points out an answer on his crossword puzzle. Now, I don't think any of the filled-in letters are actual answers, since one of them is damn and another is love, but some of them could be. But this is an actual crossword puzzle, and this looks like a brunch on a Sunday, so we've come full circle with Carrie's confidence and analogy. I feel like her morning with Sam just made her dive headfirst into the puzzle. Also, Big is doing the Time Sunday crossword puzzle in pen, so he clearly has the confidence, even if he's just dumb this whole episode. We do see as Carrie walks away that this was the Stanhope Hotel. I think they were able to film so much in here because the property was sold in 1998. The property itself is now a co-op and is now just 995 Fifth Avenue. So this patio is gone, as is Nika's bar and restaurant. Not only does our crossword puzzle analogy come full circle, but so does our episode title. In the film version of Valley of the Dolls, Barbara Perkins' Annie snaps out of her doll's abuse after almost drowning in the ocean and returns to the comfort of New England and back towards her blander, less complicated confections. Sorry for the random Hedwig reference. I couldn't help it. And that's what Carrie does here, right? She very quickly comes down from her spooning high and decides to find comfort in a relationship that isn't just about escape, even if that means it's more difficult and less exciting. Now, a few things before we part. First, Samantha keeps her streak alive, going 4 for 4 in the sex partners department. Also, let's do a quick check-in on our BIPOC character count. We're still at 2 because our cab driver doesn't have a name. Finally, I do think this is the first episode that truly embraced the potential of the show as a whole. We got a central theme that helped guide most characters through their arcs, which really helps us understand why the episode exists, even more so than the previous episode. This will only get stronger as we go, but there's a reason that Sarah Jessica Parker said of this episode, this was one of the perfect episodes of all time. It had the anal sex discussion, Carrie seeing Big, Carrie going home with the 20-something, walking down the street shopping, seeing Big in front of the Stanhope, Big running after her, them talking, her being in control, then saying, It would have been so cool if I hadn't looked back. From start to finish, it's a great episode. But that is the full breakdown and discussion of the 4th episode of Sex and the City, Valley of 20-something Guys. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. And I will see you next time.